There we go. So hi everyone, and welcome to our third and final season of Bats in Churches Live. Today we are going to be talking all about the heritage treasures hidden in English churches. So I'm Kathy, I'm the communications officer here at Bats in Churches. Just a little bit about the project for those of you who are new to us. We're a 5-year partnership between Bat Conservation Trust, Churches Conservation Trust, the Church of England, Natural England and Historic England, and we're funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. The project began in 2018 and we are rolling to a conclusion this October. That will be the end of our 5-year project, and we are now beginning to work on the legacy of Bats in Churches and how we can make sure that our learnings are still available to help churches with their Bat communities after the project ends. So today we're here to talk about an absolutely essential part of our work, and that is preserving the heritage within English churches. So we're joined today by Colin Vogel. Colin is Churchwarden at All Saints Church in Toftrees in Norfolk. Colin is an absolute wealth of knowledge and information about this small rural church, which is absolutely packed with rare and fascinating historic items. The church is a Bats in Churches project church, and it's home to at least 3 species of bat. Colin's going to give us a tour and tell us more about the church's absolutely magnificent Norman font, which is a star item, but as you'll discover, there's a lot more to Toftrees than that. Next, we're going to hear from Dr Christina Welch. Christina is a reader in religious studies and death studies at the University of Winchester. Christina is going to be talking to us today about one of the most unique heritage items within churches in England, which is a carved wooden cadaver effigy in the Church of St John the Baptist in Keyston. This cadaver dates back to the early 15th century, and it's thought to depict the cleric William Stukeley. The church itself houses a roost of Natterers bats, plus common and soprano pipistrelles. So the cadaver was very badly affected by the bats. After a full conservation clean, Bats in Churches funded a bespoke oak and perspex case for the cadaver to protect it, and it now has pride of place in the chancel and has been rededicated. And finally, we're going to hear from Bats in Churches' very own heritage advisor, Antia. Antia has travelled the country with Bats in Churches, helping churches with their heritage items and with cleaning. She's prepared cleaning guidelines for churches, and she's run workshops helping churches look after and manage their heritage. She's also created statements of significance for project churches, which helps them secure faculty and grants. So we're going to hear firstly from Colin. We're actually going to watch a film featuring Colin, and then we're available for a Q&A. Then we'll hear from Christina and have questions for Christina, and then we'll finish with Antia and questions for her. So if I could ask you to make sure your microphones are on mute, and if you could put any questions in the chat. We're not able to take specific questions on your church and your church situation, but we're happy to, Colin's obviously happy to talk about Toftrees, and we're happy to take general inquiries around heritage, looking after heritage and heritage items. If you do have a specific issue within your church that you'd like help and advice on, please do drop us an email at batsinchurchespartnership@gmail.com. So to begin with, we are going to join Colin in Toftrees to find out more about this fantastic church. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and we are going to watch a lovely film. Okay, off we go.
Hello, I'm Colin Vogel, the Churchwarden here at All Saints Church, Toftrees. Toftrees is a rather unusual parish because we never have had a big population. There are only 20 to 30 houses, and they're very, very scattered. We've never had a school or a shop or anything like that. The nearest we've had, besides the church, is an Elizabethan manor house, which lasted from the 1600s till it was pulled down in 1958. But we do have a great historical significance in that we have a wonderful font, which we'll see in a while. And as you come into the church, this is what people have seen for the last 20 years or so. They come in and they're greeted with a big plastic bag, covering what we think is possibly, I say possibly, the finest Norman font in the world. So by the magic of, I was going to say television, but the magic of filming will show you what is really special about All Saints Toftrees. We don't know why Toftrees ended up with such a wonderful font. I always imagine that one day a man turned up on an ox cart at the local squire's house and said, well, I've got these 4 lumps of stone. I could cut you a very nice font for that church of yours. It'll only cost you a few groats. And he went on to cut and carved this wonderful font. We know that he also made 3 other fonts, but ours was obviously carved at just the right time with regard to how long it was since the stone had been quarried, because the carving on this one has stayed crisp and clear, whereas the other 3 fonts are very worn and the edges are all blurred, and so you don't get the impression of the patterns anywhere nearly as well. The font, of course, was very important, and everyone would have been baptized in those days. Unfortunately, they only filled the font with water back in Norman times once a year at Easter time. And so if you were unfortunate enough to have a child that needed baptizing in February and March, on a cold Norfolk Sunday, and green old water in the font, it might not have been the healthiest thing in the world, but nonetheless, because it was holy water, everyone assumed that you would be all right. Of course, when this current building was first put up, dogs and everybody would run riot all the way around the church. There might not even have been pews originally. And then in 1640, the then hierarchy decided that this wasn't right, that dogs should be allowed to go around the altar. And it was decreed that churches had to have rails to keep dogs away from the altar. And we've got some originals. These were, we think, built in, made in 1640, roundabout, when this decree first came in, and they've kept the holiest part of the altar away from the dogs and the children that would also run riot around the church, because the churches were not treated as quite the same holier than now way as they were perhaps in the 19th and 20th centuries. This is often referred to as the priest's door. The door itself dates back to the 13th century. But the reason that I find it fascinating is because of this hole in the 3-4 foot thick wall. Because you'll notice that although this is a straight wall, this wall is angled. And that's so that somebody standing outside this door can see the altar and see the service taking place. And this was so that people who weren't allowed in the church could still have some concept as to what was going on inside. Typically, in those days, in the 13th, 14th, 15th century, it might have been lepers who, of course, had to be kept away from ordinary people. But I think it is an example of how, even though we think nowadays disability problems and access problems in churches are a new idea, all those centuries ago, they still gave some thought to those who are less fortunate than themselves. I've got here another of our treasures. It's a piece of 1620 Norwich silver, and it's called the Toftrees cup. It was given to the parish by the Churchwarden in the late 1600s. And we're obviously not able to leave it in the church. It only comes out of a safe off-site for high days and holidays, as it were. But it's interesting because it's almost modern in its design, and goes to show that not everything in the old days was fancy and things. Some of these things in churches were, their very simplicity is part of the attraction as we think of the simple things in life, which is what a lot of the Christian belief is all about. Ten years ago, if you'd come into this church, the first thing you'd have noticed was an incredibly horrible smell before you noticed the plastic bag round the font. And you probably wouldn't have come any further down than that. That's because of the large population of bats that we had at that time. And very gradually, perhaps not as quickly as one might have liked, but certainly as quickly as could be done, the Bat Project has managed to arrange for us to exclude the bats from the body of the church here and restrict them to the tower, which means that they have all the advantages of the same old stonework and nooks and crannies and things up there, whereas we are able to use the church again and to avoid further damage to the memorial stones and so forth that there are here. And this decrease in numbers, so that now we have almost finished the work and there is just one tiny little hole that still remains to be blocked off between the tower and the nave of the church. That change means that people are able to take an interest in their church again. We have, for example, had a couple of people who live in the parish that have done a tremendous amount of cleaning and restoration of the pews and general fabric of the inside of the church that just you couldn't contemplate doing when you had the concentration of bats that we had before. So now we can start to use the church more, we can welcome people to the church more, and they can start to appreciate quite how valuable an asset this church is. And of course, we're very grateful to the Bat Project for enabling that to be done. And it means that we can start to think in terms of doing more lasting renovation to the church. We have just literally yesterday learned that we've been awarded the first grant from Norfolk Churches Trust to draw up a comprehensive specification for the urgent work that needs to be done for the fabric of the church. And our hope is that we can raise the funds somehow to enable that to be done, now that we can show that it is a building that people are willing to come into and willing to use. And that's the change that the work from the Bat Project has brought about, and that I think in the years to come, we hope will bring about a new life in the Church of All Saints Toftrees. Thank you for letting me share with you the delights of our old Church of All Saints Toftrees. Please remember it's open between Easter and harvest time anyway, so if you're in this part of Norfolk, you can call in at any time, have a peaceful time and enjoy the beauty of this ancient church that we now are able to share happily with our bats. And if you would like to also make a donation at that time, of course, as with everybody, we'd be very grateful indeed. Or you can get my contact details from the diocesan contacts.
Okay. That was an excellent film. So thank you to Colin for that. And thank you to Diana for your hard work in putting that together. I can see there's been some action in the chat. So we'll just have a look at, yeah, missed the name and location of the church. Yeah, All Saints Church in Toftrees, as Diana has kindly answered. So does anybody else have any questions for Colin on the Church of All Saints or any of the items he was showing you? I was really interested to hear about the cup and sort of your point, Colin, about it being quite a modern design, sort of demonstrating that some of these heritage treasures really do represent the simplicity of the Christian ethos. I thought that was a really lovely point. So we got a question here. Would be great to hear more about the design of the font. Colin, what more can you tell us about the design?
So the design of what? The church itself, or what
the font of the font.
Oh, the font. Yes, the font's made from a single block of stone, and the actual water is contained in a copper bowl, which drains with a drainage plug, and that goes down one of the legs of the four legs of the font. We don't know which, because we're not considered taking the copper bit out and just for the sake of finding out, but presumably it then just goes into the ground underneath the church. We do have a wooden cover for the font, which was donated back in the early 1900s, and that is actually far more ornate than the font itself, which again sort of reflects the difference in people's attitude to things. But it's the other thing about it perhaps is you'll notice it's a large font. This is a very small church. After all, it's a very small parish, and you will go into cathedrals that have far smaller fonts. This was a real sort of statement piece when it was carved. Why it was considered that was needed, who knows?
Brilliant. Thanks, Colin. We've got another question here. Has the font always been copper lined, or was it originally lead?
Well, I can't tell you, because I only know from my times. So how, whether it's ever been redone, I don't know.
Sure. Brilliant, thank you. I think that's the thing about heritage as well. Some things will always remain a little bit of a mystery, and that's kind of what makes it so magical. So thank you so much, Colin, and thank you for your questions for Colin. I certainly thought that was an excellent film. So we're going to now hand over to Christina, who has more heritage treasures to introduce to us. She's going to talk to us about the cadaver at Keyston. So Christina, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hopefully you can hear me. Let's start this off. Brilliant. Oh, right. I'll just get my script, make sure I can keep to time. Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me to talk about the heritage treasure in St John the Baptist Church in Keyston, which is in Cambridgeshire. My details are on here, so if anyone wants to get in touch, you can get hold of me. So this particular carved cadaver is a very unusual wooden carved effigy of a man, an emaciated man, lain naked in an open burial shroud. As you can see from the images, the photographs here, basically he just covers his genitals with, in this case, a shroud. Some of them, they just cover it with a hand. In the last year or so, he's been conserved and moved from his original position against the slightly damp west wall of the church on a tatty metal and wooden stand, which you can see there, to the rather wonderful oak and perspex casket that stands to the left of the altar, a positioning I will come back to shortly. I started researching this carved cadaver after a visit in June 2014, so quite a long time ago. I had not long prior published my first piece of academic writing on the cadaver memorials in Britain, so I can attest to the fact that as strange as this piece of mortuary art may appear, it is part of a wider fashion. And this would include tiered memorials where an in-life effigy is twinned with an in-death representation of the memorialised individual. And you can see that with the John Fitzallen at Arundel Castle, and with single in-death figures like the one below, which is in Fennerton, and these are both in stone, and the one that we have in Keyston is wooden. There are 41 still existing in England, of which 12 were tiered, so the single ones are actually the most common. Thus, although whilst Keyston's heritage treasure is not unique, he does have a novel feature, and so to the memorial. When I first came to visit him in 2014, this notice was on the wall above him. It stated that he was probably the craftsman who created the amazing wall bosses, and you can see the roof bosses, and you can see a selection of them here. The one with his tongue stuck out is one of my favourites. The roof carvings are absolutely magnificent, but they were not done by a cleric. And as you can see from this, the carved effigy is of a cleric because the guy has a tonsure. Now, this type of memorial was hugely expensive, but for a wealthy cleric, it served a number of purposes beyond a reminder to the living of the earthly importance of the cleric after he was dead. And these purposes relate to Roman Catholic death beliefs, as this memorial, like the others in Britain of this genre, are deeply representative of their Catholic context. Central to theological views on death and the afterlife during this period of time, the cadaver sculptures were, when the cadaver sculptures were a thing, they are actually in Europe as well, but I just focus on the ones in Britain. And central to this is an understanding of purgatory. Purgatory was formally defined by the Council of Lyon in 1274 and the Council of Florence in 1439. Purgatory was the place virtually everybody went after their death. Only the sainted went straight to heaven, unbaptized souls went to limbo, a sort of non-place, and the eternally damned spent their eternity in hell. Purgatory became an increasingly complex theological issue during the medieval period, but effectively was considered a debtor's prison where souls would reside until they had repaid their earthly venial sins. These were sins, the lesser sins that were repentable. Purgatory was dramatically illustrated in Dante's comedy, and it was seen as a place of severe and painful sufferance. In a sense, a kind of transitory sort of hell, although souls gladly accepted their punishment in expectation of the rewarding unification with God. And you can see from these two images, although Dante's comedy was written between 1308 and 1321, these images are from a 15th century manuscript. And so what you can see here is people suffering literally for their sins. So you have the arrogant who are carrying heavy rocks on their back to keep their proud faces to the ground, and the greedy who are forced to eat dust. Time spent in purgatory varied according to the sinful nature of one's soul, but it was believed to be far longer than a human lifetime, although certain acts conducted in one's lifetime would give purgatorial remissions. And this is a notion that dates back to the 11th century. These acts included carrying out various works of mercy. The 7 corporeal acts of mercy are depicted here in a wall painting at Trotton in Sussex, but it's the spiritual acts of mercy that relate to the carved cadaver, notably praying for the dead and very possibly instructing the ignorant. Carved cadavers in Britain start in the early 1400s, and by this time, purgatorial remissions for the dead was an increasingly common understanding, although papal verification was less clear-cut. Chaucer's The Pardoner's Tale, so that's 1369 to 73, provides an example of church-endorsed lay indulgences based around remissions for the living. These were pieces of paper that could be purchased, specifying an amount of time off the pains experienced and the time spent in purgatory. While understandings of why such a practice might be popular can be seen from the 1422 anonymous English tract, Revelations of Purgatory, where a woman recounts a vision where she sees a nun suffering in purgatory, her skin rent and burning and fire leaping from her mouth. So it would make sense for this cleric to have a memorial that would remind people to pray for him and help him reduce his own purgatorial sufferings. It's believed that this is the cleric William Stukely, who seems to have died at one of his benefices, Witherington, a few miles southeast of Cheltenham, where he lay sick. His will was sealed on the 7th of April 1407, and we can assume he died shortly after. He asked to be buried at Stukely, presumably Great or Little Stukely near Huntingdon, only a few miles from Keyston, in the burial place in the nave he had constructed for his parents. It's not known if he was indeed buried in Stukely, but his carved cadaver is in Keyston and has been for well over a century, with David Lepine, an expert on monumental brasses, tracing the memorial to Keyston in a document dated 1868. An antiquarian cleric, William Sweeting, gives a very brief description, noting that the memorial was in the chancel. Lepine also later found references which didn't mention its location until he discovered one from 1922, which notes it was in the south aisle at the west end. In 1936, another document notes it was, quote, loose in the church, close quote. When I first saw the sculpture, it was against the west wall of the north aisle, presumably where it had been positioned after being loose in the church. And the inaccurate plaque presumably dates from around this time. When I visited the memorial again in August 2021, I noticed a woodworm was eating the writing, and thankfully this provided a really good excuse to burn the plaque. And it was during this trip that Liz Ford, a real mover and shaker in Keyston in relation to this effigy, told me of her plan to conserve the memorial properly. Not only is he in his new location, not only is his new location in the chancel true to the position of the 1868 document, but it accords with another local cadaver sculpture, that of John Carraway in Fulbourn, which you can see here, a village about 40 miles away from Keyston. Carraway was the long-time rector of Fulbourn Church and died in 1443, and his memorial stone is a stone carved cadaver which, as can be seen from this photograph, lies on the north side of the altar in a position that suggests it acted as an Easter sepulchre, that is, holding from Good Friday to Easter Monday the Blessed Sacrament with a crucifix. A hugely important part of the Easter rite, the sepulchre would have been guarded by parishioners and surrounded by candles. Everyone would have seen it and thus would have seen him, and he would garner a whole host of additional prayers. You may just be able to make out on the now white wall where a brass plaque would once have been fitted, and doubtless there would have been a wall painting adorning the area, probably showing the resurrection and symbolising the glory of the world to come. Stukely, rector of the Keyston Church, was likely once to have been in a similar position, and his new memorial places him there now. And so back to Stukely and why he really is a heritage treasure and unique among these unusual forms of memorials. He lies facing east on the north side of the altar, and his memorial would have been a visceral reminder of the dead body of Christ, probably with the host and accoutrements placed on the board that covers him. That is, the memorial was secured in some way. Oh, hold on, I don't know if I've skipped. No, I haven't, don't worry. For some reason I've missed a slide out. Sorry about that. So you've got a bit of anatomy before I move to the anatomy thing. But the memorial was secured in some way to the wall, and there's a half notch along one side that gives us a clue, suggesting that it was never a standalone piece. And indeed, the analysis done by Lucy Rapson, who's at Cambridge, adds to this. She notes that the palette of colours is limited because he was once polychromed, and that the quote, the painter has used the types of pigment more associated with large-scale wall paintings than small-scale panel paintings, close quote. And Carraway once had a scene painted above his memorial too. But as I'm sure anyone who's visited Keyston has noticed, the memorialised man is eviscerated. That is, his torso has been opened and his bowels removed. You can see the inside part of his spine with clearly defined vertebrae. Unless you'd seen this detail firsthand, you would not have been able to carve this much detail, and as such we can presume that the sculptor had witnessed at least one evisceration. Eviscerations were not new procedures, as in the late 13th century, as this manuscript shows, they were depicted, nor were they cheap, typically being done as a form of embalming when a body needed to be moved from the place of death to the place of burial, which would have been some distance away. Stukely died in Withington, around 100 miles from Stukely and 90 from Keyston. It would have taken several days to transport the corpse, and looking at information on the weather at that time, the winter had been very severe, so travelling conditions would not have been good if travel was even possible. Evisceration, therefore, would have slowed decomposition of the body. If we look carefully, we can see that the intestines and the stomach have been removed, just as under the ribs, and you can see that I've highlighted, the base of the lungs appear to be present. We can see too that the man is not decomposing, as his chest muscles are still evident. The flesh is not missing from the body, but the skin appears shriveled, allowing the bones and sinews to show. And whilst this sounds gruesome enough to us, work done in 2021 on the remains of the polychromy that once covered his body show that he was painted pink. His winding cloth used to cover his genitals were white, and the plinth under his body was a reddy black colour. And what is most unusual about this is that there is no sealant under the polychrome. It was applied direct to the wood as wall painting was done. And given the cut-out plinth on the original, it's evident that the effigy was once part of a larger memorial, most probably including a wall painting. And on this bottom photograph, you can see the deliberate cutout in the plinth where he would have been attached to the wall. However, it's not only paint analysis that I've had done on this memorial, because I've also had the wood dated with a probability of 95.4% that the tree was cut between 1394 and 1435. And we know from the polychrome analysis that the wood, a large single piece of local oak, was painted when it was green, that is, when it was unseasoned. The earliest existing example of a tiered transy, of any transy actually, is the tiered transy to Bishop Chicheley in Canterbury Cathedral, and this dates to 1426. So the Keyston one is its contemporary. And from the hole that runs all the way down the length of wood from the top of the shroud to originally the feet, because the feet are now largely missing, that it was carved by holding it at an angle to secure it on a pole, much like this image, which is actually of a stone carving, shows. So it was tilted and carved that way. We don't obviously know whether the sculptor was male or female though. But whoever did carve this sculptor had largely anatomically accurate depictions of an eviscerated male body. It's the only one like it in Britain and one of the earliest. That it's been conserved for the future is amazing. And whilst it's fantastic that bats are safe in the church, that they can no longer do any damage to this unusual memorial is wonderful. And just to say, I hope I'm not the only person who is, quote, batshit crazy about this particular heritage treasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. That was absolutely fascinating. And I think it's safe to say you're not the only person who's crazy about that heritage treasure. It's incredibly, it's one of our most discussed items within the project, and it's been an incredibly important part of the Bats in Churches project. Now, thanks to Christina's work and also to the work of our previous heritage advisor, Rachel Arnold, as Christina said, the cadaver has been professionally cleaned by a conservator, and now has his own oak and perspex case, which is breathable to prevent any further bat damage and also to prevent any moisture damage to the wood itself. So I would very much encourage you, if you are ever nearby, to go and visit the cadaver. I mean, the photographs that Christina has provided are fantastic, but I'm reliably assured there is absolutely no substitute for seeing it in real life and being in its presence. So I would very much encourage any of you to go and do that. I was thinking as you were talking though, Christina, wouldn't it be absolutely fascinating to have seen it in its original monument alongside the wall painting, and how different it would have looked, you know, with the paint and the surroundings. I don't know if you have any idea of what that would have looked like.
Well, what's really interesting is the whole of the body was painted pink. So even where he was hollowed out, where his bowels were removed, would actually have been polychromed, painted pink. So what you have is an image of a dead man, but painted as though he was alive. And some of the others, so there's one in Bury St Edmunds. If you go and look at the one in Bury St Edmunds, there's actually a couple that have got this feature. You can actually see that veins have been carved into the, well, largely stone. The Keyston one is only one of 2 wooden carved cadavers in Britain. And so they were actually painted as if they were still alive, which sort of relates to this idea of some sort of sentience whilst you're in purgatory. So you might be physically dead, but in purgatory you would suffer spiritually. But I think there was an understanding that you would probably suffer physically as well, because these items are definitely carved to look alive. So which is really bizarre when you've got a man that's clearly very dead because he's had his bowels taken out. But yeah, honestly, in his day, he would have looked spectacular. So the wooden bier that he's on was painted to look like wood, a bit bonkers perhaps. The shroud that he was laying on was white, just like a burial shroud would have been. And then his body was painted pink. And I imagine that his eyes would have been brown and he would have had brown hair, with his little tonsure probably pink as well. So he would have been a sight. Let's leave it at that. He would have been interesting.
He certainly would. I mean, he's still a sight now, you know, even though he's obviously very old, and he has suffered he's suffered through the presence of bats, and then this is also something that has become part of his heritage as well. So
yeah, and he's definitely suffered through the Reformation and the Civil War. So you can, if you go and look at him, you can actually see where there's an axe cut or a sword cut, more likely an axe cut actually into his legs. You know, there's various bits of damage, but he is 600 years old. So he's doing pretty well for 600 years, to be quite honest. But yeah, honestly, if anybody's around that area, just outside of Cambridge, do go and see him. He's spectacular. He's 3/4 length, so he's not full size, but he really is worth seeing, and he is unique in the world. Not only is he the only one like this in Britain, I haven't been able to trace any like him in Europe, and the carved cadavers are something that were a genre for Northern Europe only. So it's quite a small geographical area, but he is completely unique. You won't see another one like him ever.
sure. It's also, I mean, it's also kind of relevant. He is 600 years old, but presumably the tree that was used to make him would have reached a fair old age to be able to accommodate a carving of that size. So, you know, potentially he's a lot older, you know, than that, sort of in his previous form. So does anybody have any questions for Christina before we move on? You know, there's nothing in the chat at the minute. But if you do think of anything, obviously during the next presentation, that you would like to ask Christina, or any questions about the cadaver, then do just pop them in the chat and we can come to Christina again at the end. So next we're going to move on to Bats in Church's very own Antia, who is, as I've said, our heritage advisor. So obviously a big part of what we do at Bats in Churches is help churches preserve their heritage, their historic monuments, and just the interiors of their church, which can you know, can suffer significant damage due to the resident bats. So this is where Antia comes in, and I'm going to hand over to her now. She's going to talk a bit about her work and what she's done for the project, you know, a bit of help and advice for churches who do need help with cleaning of their heritage items. And then she's also going to let us know a few of her favourite heritage treasures that she's come across in her travels. So Antia, over to you.
Hi everybody, let me share my screen. if I can do this. So you can see it.
Yeah, all good, Antia.
Whoa. Bear with me because, yeah, there you go. Right, so first, a bit about me. So I started with the Bats in Churches project in May last year. So I've been helping churches cohabiting with bats for over a year now. So my job is to take care of all the heritage needs of the churches in a project, but we also work with some that are not in a project, either with general or specific advice, and also doing statements of significance and delivering cleaning workshops. So I'm going to talk a bit about all those things that I do, and just to give you some highlights. So one of the major things that I have to do is the statement of significance. So a statement of significance is a document that churches need to produce to apply for faculty and also to apply for grants, as the normally listed documents. So it will describe the building and its elements, laying out historical, artistical, and architectural significance. And for us, in this case, the ones that I produced also at the BAT impact. So we do one for each church, and these statements reflect the cohabitation between the bats and the humans in the same space. So most of the statements that we do are based, especially the bats part of it, on the surveys that our ecologists have done. Sometimes it's just a light touch ecological survey, and sometimes a full report that tell us where the roots are, what parts are getting more damage. And also we, working with the ecologists and with the PCCs, we try to propose solutions for the management of the bats that live in that church. So it's a lot of work, a lot of archival research, but it's really, really go with the next one. Another thing that I have to do is doing heritage cleaning workshops, and I've been going around the country just giving advice to people and doing these heritage workshops. We still have 3 left, and I will put the dates and the links at the end of the presentation, so you can have a look. So churches have been a major part of our community for hundreds of years, and our task as custodians is just to do our best to preserve them for generations to come. They're home to artifacts that we, as we have seen today, rival anything found in national museums and also in stately homes, from 15th century painted screens to monumentally huge sculpted tombs to a cadaver or a nice really cut. So even though objects like these may seem robust because they're made of stone, they're made of wood, we still need to treat them with a lot of care. And there's a difference between conservation cleaning and what you do at home. Obviously, I definitely don't clean my house the same way I teach to clean the church. So what we try to do is just try our best to not damage the objects that we have under care, because bad cleaning methods could damage and shorten the life of the items that we're trying to save. So we have to achieve a balance between the church being pristine and super clean and preserving the integrity of the things that we have. So while cleaning modern houses, hospitals, offices, or even the modern kitchen and toilets that we can have in our churches, the materials that we use to clean that would be sprays, floor cleaners, bleach. We can vacuum dirt and scrub. This is not something that we recommend that you do well your most heritage important elements. So the walls, the floors, the seats, the artifacts are more delicate and ancient in some times. So it makes sense that those cleaning materials are not always appropriate for the use in the scene. In medieval times, they didn't have all those sprays. So why they're not, most of the things are were not built to be clean with those really sprays that we have now. So I was thinking of I spoke with Kathy the other day, and I was reminded of the story that somebody from the Museum of London told me, one of the conservators, where when she first started, she was given a mug with lots of tea stains inside, and they told her, what would you do with this? And she would quickly like, oh, we can do this and these, we can wash it and we can clean it, and we have to get rid of the tea stains. Well, those tea stains were tea stains from Queen Victoria, so it has historic importance. So we have to think that sometimes cleaning is not the most important part to preserve an object. So yeah, so we have some food for thought. So we have produced a booklet with cleaning guidelines for churches with bat that you can find in our website, and it's a really detailed booklet that divides different material and how to clean them. And in here you can see this is the kit that we hand out with to all the attendees to our workshops. It's a really basic kit, but it allows you to clean the church. You would think, why are there pop socks? They're there for a reason. You can put them on the vacuum hose and it will prevent any bits and pieces of that could detach from the object that you're cleaning to be sucked into the vacuum. So basically what you need to clean is a brush, most likely a soft brush. In this case we provide goat brush, and then microfiber cloths. Those are the two basic that you have to use to clean. So less is more. So we normally don't use liquids or sprays, so it can damage the surface of objects. So first option will always be dry clean. Please do not use, you can see there like cross, Brasso and Pledge. We don't use for wood commercial products that contain acrylics or silicates. I know that it looks really nice and shiny, but it's detrimental to the wood and also attracts lots of insects that will end up eating our wood, which is something that we don't want. The same, no Brasso or any similar product that is abrasive, because imagine if you continue rubbing, imagine you have a brass plaque or medieval brass plaque, and you keep using Brasso. First, you will end up with lots of green areas when you have not cleaned it properly. And then if the continued use of Brasso is, as is an abrasive, you end up with a plaque with no relief at all. So it will be such a shame. Also no natural oils like nut oil or olive oils. It got rancid and moldy and leech pest infestation. And if you use, for example, linseed oil on tiles, it could black them and age them easier. So it's better to just use dry methods, and if not, a bit of water would go a long way. So go ahead, and you can see here one of those, how it looks, one of those workshops that is me just delivering in one of our nice churches. And this is, you have another photo there with the long pole, extendable pole that we give to our churches, which is the star of the show. I could not turn up and just send the pole and they will be happy about it. And here we just have some of the hands-on cleaning session. So we do first do a theoretical, and I speak a lot and tell them what to do, what not to do, and then we go to the hands-on part of the session when they have a go to put in practice everything that they have learned. So all these things that we talk in this workshop and in this booklet, you can use them for anything. You don't have to do. You have to have bats in your church. If your church have bats, cleaning should focus on removing urine and droppings. Some stains are going to be more difficult, and you can see here the effects of urine on different tiles and also on brass. Unfortunately, all these stains are quite difficult to get out, mainly because they're not stains, is the acids in the urine are eating the product. So a conservator will be the only one able to clean it, to bring it back to normal. And like I said here, but poo is safe to touch. They eat insects, the bats that we have in the UK, and the only worry that you could have is that you were allergic to some of the insects that the bat have eaten, but if not, it should be fine. So a simple pan and brush should be enough, or you can hoover them. If you're starting a whole cleaning program from scratch, and first, it's better if you clean the whole church. I know this is a big task, but then it will allow you to record and map the areas most affected by droppings, and it will form part of your cleaning plan. And in the booklet that I was mentioning before, we provide some templates to take care of these cleaning schedules. So you go an annual cleaning calendar. As you can see, it's nothing to detail. Sweep and dry mop floors is something that you will do every month, but then you can divide the other task all along the different months, so you don't have to work a lot. And we recommend that you keep just a record of what was clean, who cleaned it, in case something happened. And this also helps you to keep an eye on other things like water leaks or paint damage on the walls. So it's really useful. Taking photos, allocating roles, having a rota. It's not, if you have volunteers or you have members of the congregation, that will be something that is easily done. Before we even attempt to clean something, we need to stop and think about the object itself. Is it safe to clean? Is the structure stable? Is there any areas of weakness or any delicate surface? Are there pente areas? Is it flaking? So all these things that we have to think before we even attempt to clean the objects, especially if they're really delicate. If you think of anything, if you have responded yes to any of these questions that I've just put down, it's better you don't clean it. At the end, it's better that we have a dirty object, that we don't have an object at all. So it's something food for thought. Is also useful to have an sorry, it just went individual, to have an individual condition care template. It doesn't have to be this template that we have here. Just you can write on a notebook every time you clean an object, or you just take a photo. Like I said, it will help us to have a history of how this object looks in case something gets damaged or is being attacked by pests, by insects. So we can note down and we can know, oh, well, the last time I cleaned it, it was fine. So it has to be in this last year or this half year. So it's really useful for the preservation of the objects. And like Kathy was saying, I have gone all over the country, and this is some of the objects that we have in our churches that I really like. Sometimes we focus on big things. I really like focusing on small things, and as Christina said, I also like the things. I also like skulls and bats. So I love to look for the little skulls that are hidden in our churches, and also all the animals. You can see here some of the bats that we have. But yeah, this is some of the things that you can see. That maybe they're not the most beautiful and big, and the ones that appear in all the guidebooks, but are the ones that make me happy. Thinking. And as for future cleaning workshops, these are the last 3 that we're going to have because the project is finishing this year. So we have one on Wellington, one in Grafton, and one in Newton Blossomville, so kind of west, southern and Midlands. So if you want to come, you have the Eventbrite in there. And also, if you have any question for me about, you don't have to think about it now, but if in the future you have something, just send us an email to the general email and it will be passed down to me. And I think that's me.
Brilliant. Thank you, Antia. That was fantastic. I have put links in the chat to the cleaning guidelines that Antia referenced, and I've also put a link in the chat to the events page where you can book on to the heritage cleaning workshops. They are free. They're also a fantastic day because you get to, as Antia said, you get to get hands-on with things. We can pay travel expenses, and churches get a copy of the cleaning guidelines and a cleaning kit when they come along, including the wonderful long pole, which is, as Antia says, our #1 item, and just, you know, the most fantastically useful resource. And again, sort of a theme about today is it's proof that sometimes it really is the simple things that make the most difference. So if anybody has any questions for Colin, Christina or Antia, do put them in the chat now. We are obviously coming to a close. It's 2 o'clock. So if people have to go off and finish their lunch breaks and get back to work, then that's fine. I'm not seeing any questions coming, but as Antia said, any questions you have, you can email us, batsinchurchespartnership@gmail.com, and your email will get passed on to the relevant person within the project. So thank you for coming today. It's been an excellent event and lovely to have so many people coming and taking an interest in heritage treasures and how to look after them. Our final Bats in Churches Live is next Tuesday, and we will be in conversation with Peter Ross, who is author of Steeplechasing Around Britain by Church. He's also the author of A Tomb with a View. So it should be a really fantastic event, you know, listening to a fantastic writer talk about his experience going around England by church. So thanks ever so much, everybody, for coming, and we hope to see you next Tuesday.